Sin runs deep, your grace is more, your grace is found, is where you are, Lord, I am free, holiness is Christ in me, Lord, I need you, oh, I need you, every hour I need you, my one defense, my righteousness, oh God, how I need you. Teach my song to rise to you when temptation comes my way. When I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Bless the Lord, oh my soul.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Off to my right is Marty. I'm sorry, it's not Marty after all, is it? It's Ann. We talked Ann into coming in, sitting in Marty's place. And so thanks, Ann, for joining us with all this. And Ann actually is being Jerry tonight more than Marty tonight. I think I'm supposed to be Marty tonight. And Father Mark's gone someplace. He's out the way. And believe it or not, Jerry is in St. Louis. I'm not sure he's going to ever join us or anything like this, but he's studying for some program for his work. He's doing some things with work. He's been out there for 4 days. And here we got in the middle of us, all of us, is John, zoomed in from St. Louis. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to have the gang back together here.
Yeah. What's that picture behind you?
Ooh, bonus points for anyone who can guess.
Yeah, so you got to guess, by the way, folks, what that picture is behind John there. And we're going to pray here for a moment. So thanks, everybody. And of course, Steve's over here. If we didn't have him, we would be in big trouble here doing all this. So let me start with a prayer. And then I want to ask John one great, big, important question. But what's that picture behind John? That's the big question. And you get a free prize. I don't know what it is yet. Maybe it'll be a way to go from us. But let's pray in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, you have called us to a certain greatness. You have called us to have a personal intimacy with you. I wonder sometimes how many of us actually believe that is really true, that we are called to such a thing. And every day, day in and day out, experience of you and in the silence of life, in the struggles of life, to somehow have you point us the way to a deeper intimacy with one another and also with you. So bless us tonight to see if we can somehow, in some way, try to understand more and more about what all this means that we're on today, as we're in, as Pope Francis says, not an era of change, but the change of an era. And we ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So bless us, welcome everybody. And let me just sort of start off, John, is this on our notes right here? This is a literal translation from the German of the quote that we're going to be talking about here tonight.
Yes.
Let me pull this apart for just a moment. It says, the devout Christian of the future, which we're going to claim is now. Would that be correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Will either be a mystic, one who has experienced something. What do you mean somebody's experienced something? And let me finish the quote and then we'll go back. One who has experienced something, or he will cease to be anything at all. Whoa. Okay. One who has experienced something. Can I ask you that question now, or are we going to wait until we get into that a little bit later? Just by way of broad strokes here.
Yeah. So the question is, what does it mean to experience something?
Yes. This mystical understanding of Rahner.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll kind of dodge the question because we will circle back a little bit.
Okay.
I think you're right. That is the heart of the quote. The devout Christian of the future will either be a mystic, that is, one who has experienced something, and experienced is in quotes there,
right?
Or he will cease to be anything at all.
What does that part mean?
I think central to all of this is just Rahner's idea that either we will have an experience of something, a conscious awareness. We will be like the fish in water that can suddenly become aware of the water itself, or people are just going to leave the faith because there's going to be nothing left for them. He's saying that in the future, and he's writing this in the 60s, so kind of in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, he's saying, unless we cultivate this conscious experience, people are going to leave.
Has that happened, do you think?
Oh my goodness. Has that happened, do you think? And that's an easy question. That's a yes or no one. Has that happened?
Yes. It is absolutely happening, absolutely everywhere. And I think we're not far behind Europe, which has completely been devastated in the life of the faith. And the author of a book I just got done reading just claims that that is our fault. All of that because we were so watered down. The church was so watered down, and the faith was so watered down that it couldn't be anything but that people following because there's nothing left to follow. It was just dirty dishwater in such a way, so there was nothing left there to follow. So he says they have fallen away until they cease to be anything at all, which means cease to be anything at all as far as Christians are concerned?
Correct. Yeah. The context, the immediate context of this quote, really, it's from an essay of his called Christian Living Formerly and Today. And this particular section, he's talking about what it means to be devout. So that key word there, the devout Christian of the future. Mm-hmm. And what he's saying is that's not going to be marked by these external practices or these devotional this or that or any sort of sacramental measurement. It is either going to be that they've experienced something, or they won't. It's not that they won't be devout. It's that they won't even be Christian.
Wow. Well, why don't you begin? There's a lot to jump into. Why don't you begin to tell us a little about who is this guy, Karl Rahner? Who is he? And by the way, hi, Amy and Bill. They just chimed in here a little bit with us. So
all right, we've got like a whole national brigade here.
Yeah.
As I'm kind of rambling a little bit about Karl Rahner here, I'd love to just, I have an eye on the comments coming in. If anyone has any thoughts, any gut reactions, if you're familiar with this name, I know Father Mark will refer to him from time to time, but just anything that'll kind of help guide our conversation. So with that, I guess I'll just give you the answer. Karl Rahner, we're talking 20th century right here. He was born in 1904. He passed away in 1984. He was German. He was a Jesuit. Both of those get a little bit important throughout his life. So he was kind of born into a church that was struggling with modernism. If you think turn of the century, 1904, this is a world that was becoming increasingly more scientific, more historical, more empirical, we might say. The advent of fields like archaeology and paleontology had been rocking the church's foundation, the kind of intellectual foundations, for several decades at this point. What do we do with the book of Genesis now that we have fossils of dinosaurs and we know that the earth is millions, if not billions of years
I
old?
had someone ask me just yesterday, you mean to tell me there's no Noah's Ark up on Mount Arafat? Because I said that last week, I think, and someone said, did I hear you right? And I said, yeah, you did. You kind of heard me right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, there's good evidence that the church fathers for the first several centuries had a deep intuition that this was not literal historical scientific stuff, but that kind of went dormant, and it really blew apart around the turn of the century. So the church that Karl Rahner was born into was a church that had kind of turned against the world, that had really clamped down on modernism in all its forms, that had said, if you are not using the theology of Thomas Aquinas, you are not welcome. I mean, to the point where there are papal documents saying this is the textbook you should be using in all seminaries. In many ways, I mean, it's kind of an embarrassment on the church. This is a scar on the church. This is not something that is super proud of, because, I mean, a mere 20, 30, 40 years later, there was a bit of a reversal of this and a more open stance toward modernism and kind of modern intellectual movements. And of course, the big moment of that, the big historical moment, was the Second Vatican Council, which was kind of like a window opening into the modern world. Not that we accept it wholesale in any sense, but that there's now an open dialogue with modernism rather than this kind of fear and this constant counter attack that we need to be in.
Even though that's still with us in many ways, that fear of the modern world and fear of science, and still people thinking that the church has an issue with science, which it does not, which we tried to state a couple months ago that it does not, but still exists.
Absolutely. And I mean, even I think the church might have wrestled with modernism, and there's kind of a little bit of a peace and dialogue, but we are deep into postmodernism now.
Exactly.
We'll get to that a little bit. So here comes Karl Rahner, definitely a mover and shaker of the Second Vatican Council. I don't know what his official position was at the council, because it's not like he was a cardinal, but he was invited to kind of be a thinker, to have a voice, to sort of, I like to think of it as he kept poking his head in all the rooms and weighing in on discussions and kind of giving his theological 2 cents. He was not the only one.
Wasn't Joseph Ratzinger one of those guys?
Joey Ratzinger was indeed one of those guys. Henry de Lubac, Yves Congar. Yeah, all these big.
These are all rocket scientists. They're all brainy. These are brilliant men in many ways.
Yeah, I'd love to sit down and have a beer with these guys, but I don't think I would understand a word they're saying, even if they were speaking in English. But so Rahner, so that's just kind of a backdrop of that. That's the church he was born into. And then, kind of ended up at the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II, where he had his chance at the microphone, really. But kind of getting there is interesting. So a fun fact about Karl Rahner is that he failed his doctoral dissertation. So, when you're in graduate school, when you are pursuing a PhD, you need to produce a dissertation that needs to be, on some level, original research. And he submitted his and failed it because it was considered so unorthodox. It said, and I mean, we could get deep into the weeds here, but essentially he zoomed in on a particular teaching of Thomas Aquinas, but read it through the lens of some of these modern thinkers of the day. Immanuel Kant had come before him. Martin Heidegger was around and actually taught him a little bit in his doctoral studies. But anyway, Rahner kind of threw all these guys together in his reading of Aquinas, and it was just considered way too out there to be accepted. So basically, all that to say that Karl Rahner, he existed in the 20th century, which was a very interesting time in the church's history, but he was very much a part of riding the wave, kind of leading the wave into this modern openness of the church.
Okay. So before we get into mysticism and what that is, we're going to do that very, very quickly here in a minute. But there's a couple terms that you use that I think are really important for us to understand. First of all, the one term you use is theological anthropology. What is theological anthropology? It's easy for me to say.
Yeah. So, okay. Ronner's two first big texts. One was his dissertation, which became the text Spirit in the World. And then his second text, which kind of, it's not like the sequel, it's almost like a repackaging of that with a little bit extra. It's called Hearer of the Word. To say that Ronner developed a theological anthropology is to say that in these texts, he pretty much came to an understanding of what it means to be human. That's what anthropology is, the study of humankind, what it is to be human in the light of theology. So the definition that he came to, and again, this is the short version. This is sparing everyone the 500 pages of this German philosophical mumbo jumbo that you read the same paragraph 30 times. I think we could boil it down to three. Spare us
that one. Spare that one.
Well, 3 words.
By the way, all your questions, folks, throw them out there with all this stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah. So 3 words kind of define Ronner's theological anthropology.
And this is important, folks. Pay attention up. This is
So this is his definition of what it means to be human in light of faith. The words are spirit, freedom, and history. So if you could remember those 3 words, spirit, freedom, and history, you will have a very good grasp on Ronner. To kind of go into them, first is spirit. Bear with me. This one is by far the most complicated of the 3. Essentially, to be spirit, to say that the human person is spirit, is to say that we have a fundamental openness to the transcendence of God. A fundamental openness to the transcendence of God.
Could I say, I was reading that earlier, can I say it's becoming childlike in a way, in a sense that children are so profoundly, fundamentally open?
I think so.
With that? I don't know. That's what I thought of, watching a child and wonder.
Wonder. I think wonder is a good example of this, that we somehow have this intuition that there is something beyond us.
Yeah.
Now, Ronner goes into the very, very intense proofs of all of this, again, using the methodology of Aquinas, blah, blah, blah. But I think you could boil it down to wonder. No matter what we're looking at, if we're looking at this phone or this water bottle or another human, we can intuit that there is something beyond this existence that is always shining forth, that is always coming at us in a very tangible way, but we're always open and aware of this grasping beyond what is right in front of us toward this sort of infinite horizon of being itself. Good. Is that making sense?
I will stick with wonder. That's a very good. So openness to that which is beyond.
Yes. Okay. So that's spirit.
Okay.
The other word is freedom. Now this one gets interesting because it's not just that we are fundamentally open to what is beyond. It's not just that we have the capacity for wonder and the capacity to seek infinite being. It's that we are free to do so or not. And this becomes really important. We will come back to this when we talk a little bit more about applying this to mysticism. But essentially, this comes from God's freedom, right? We would believe that God is a person in the sense that God is free to act or not. God is free to enter into creation or not. God is free to create or not. God did not have to create. God doesn't need creation to be God. God is free, and our freedom is a reflection of that. So just because we are open to what is beyond, we can sort of, as humans, shut our eyes and shut out that transcendence. We have freedom to exist in this world or not. Is that still making sense?
Yeah, it sounds like we do it all the time.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think this is a very important point to keep in mind, that it's not just this given. It's not that, oh, we just have this immediate relationship with God. That's the end of the story. We do have an immediate relationship with God. We have an immediate um, potency, potential, capacity for a relationship with God, but we are free to reject it. That rejection might be illusion. It might be just in our own sense of ego, and God might burn that illusion away in the fullness of time. But we are free to at least turn away from God for a time.
Yeah, and I just curious to ask the people watching us right now if they could, do you believe you have that freedom? Do you believe that, first of all, there is this wonder that you could have for a God who is present in our world, and do you really believe that you can meet him, that you can be with him, and you're free to do that or free not to do that? Would that be a way of saying it that way together? Those two things?
Yeah, I think about that freedom. When I was running Youth Alpha, I would always talk with the volunteers after the retreat, after the day away for us, because there were times when every teenager would come up for prayer. And it was beautiful. I mean, like, of course, that's beautiful. Then there were times when maybe only one or two would come up for prayer. And we would always kind of have this little debrief about freedom. And we'd say, listen, they are free to respond or not. And sometimes to become fully human is just to become aware that you are free. Even if your answer is no, you're at least free to say no.
Okay.
Love can only ever be free. And the kind of dark side of that moon is that sometimes that means that the answer is going to be no.
Okay. What about this third one? History.
History. Okay, this is my favorite one of the three. So spirit, freedom, history. Spirit is that we have this openness to transcendence. Freedom is that we are free to engage in that capacity to embrace God or not. History is the fact that as humans, we exist in space and time. And as such, any way that God is going to encounter us is going to happen in space and in time. That as humans, we can't just sort of be lifted out of our usual way of thinking or being or engaging with the world. God is always going to speak to us in a human way. That's what the Bible is. We would believe that that is God speaking through true human authors, not just this sort of flash of light that suddenly lifts us beyond ourselves, but we are always operating in space and time.
Excellent, excellent. So everybody, we all got that. Okay, those three, everything okay with all that? And then that leads to a problem. What happens? Okay, God, okay, first of all, we can get to God. We have a freedom to say yes or no to God. God speaking to us in the context of a human fashion in our lives. Well, what happens when we don't think God is speaking at all to us?
Yeah, this is really fascinating, because all of this is kind of, in so many ways, what Rahner is doing in developing this quote unquote theological anthropology is he's answering the question, is revelation possible? Or how is revelation possible? How can we, mere finite creatures, hear a word from God who is infinite? How does that possibly work? So he kind of goes through all this. Well, we can because we are spirit, because we are free to hear it, because God speaks in history, all of this. But then there's this big lingering question, which is that what happens when God is silent?
Is God really silent, or does he seem to be silent?
I don't know. I would be interested to hear what people think about that. Do you feel like, has anyone ever experienced the silence of God, that kind of desperation of prayer where you need God to speak, but God doesn't seem to speak at all? Have either of you?
I have, for sure, but every time it seems to me that there's something inside of me that was blocking him. And I'll be specific a little bit. I think oftentimes whenever I have felt such silence of God, that my own self-contempt, my own self-rejection has prevented me from hearing God. And then whenever I can settle that a little bit, and I can begin to get my bearings a little bit, if I can put it that way, all of a sudden I sense him speaking, and actually speaking quite clearly. So I don't know. I wonder, is it us, or is it God just simply doing one of these and saying, I think I'm going to shut up for a while here and let them see what they do? I wonder about that. I don't know. But has Ron ever attacked that question?
He does. He does. Before we get to it, Anne, what do you think?
I think that, I think I look at it as like an on-off switch on my own part, which is my fault. Okay, I'll turn the switch on. Okay, God, where are you? And I'm talking to you and I hear nothing. And then when I don't, then the switch is off and I'm on my own. And so it's not.
But you said your switch is on. You said your switch is on.
Well, because when I'm aware, oh wait, I can, like right now I want to hear from God, or this is my time. Here's my 15 minutes of silence. And I always want it on my terms, my time, and it doesn't work that way.
No,
and,
it doesn't. Yeah.
You get distracted with the ongoing of life. And what's the remedy for that? What is the remedy? How do you hear God?
I like that. I think that's a funny image of it. It's like, I will sit for 15 minutes from 12:15 to 12:30. God, if you want to say something, that's when you're going to do it,
I'm giving you 15 minutes here.
Yeah. I think that is the normal experience of humanity, even Christians. And I think that's sort of what Ronner's engaging with a little bit as he engages this question of silence. It's that sort of tension between we believe that God is always revealing God's self, that God is always communicating God's self. We call that grace, and grace is always and already coming toward us. And somehow it's not like we hear God speaking. There's something about God's silence. Well, kind of two things happen, and this is where we go back to that idea of freedom a little bit. Ronner writes about how freedom in itself reveals, silence in itself reveals God's freedom to speak or not. That it's not like God is always just sort of rambling. God's not like a radio station that all we need to do is tune in and okay, we'll catch this sort of stream of consciousness of God babbling on. There are times when God does not speak, or at least does not speak in ways that we are hearing, perhaps. God is free. So sometimes God's silence is his way of speaking to us.
I like that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
Yeah, he's revealing his own freedom. And in some ways, that reveals that the times when God does speak are that much more emphatic. God has spoken at certain points in history. God delivered the Israelites out of Egypt. God spoke, revealed God's self in the fullness of Jesus Christ. We believe that these things actually happened. So these times when he might be silent, just sort of, they provide the backdrop so that these other moments can shine more readily. Is that making sense?
Yes. Yeah. So we have the silence, or God speaks, or his silence is a way of communicating as well. Okay, let's zero into what we're talking about here today. We get a lot of background here. Let's talk about define mysticism then for us, given everything we talked about so far. Here we are, the hoi polloi. I'm like this parish priest. I remember a priest saying to me one time whenever I was in a seminary, he said, look, if you want to pray, go join a monastery someplace. Here, you're supposed to do some work. You're supposed to build something a building or something like that. And of course, Anne, representing the hoi polloi here, the laity, of course, God doesn't, the laity being mystics, are you kidding me? What are we talking about here? And so here we are, the riffraff, trying to somehow figure out and think, is God actually calling me? What is this mysticism that he might be calling us to in all this?
Yeah. As we kind of get ramped up, I really am interested in just sort of a broad definition of mysticism. If anyone wants to just venture a comment in that.
So folks, participate. Give us your thoughts here.
It's It's an interesting word, and I think you're right. I think it's either we don't have time for that, or that's not for me, or I certainly couldn't be a mystic. I need to be holy enough, or I've always been kind of afraid of it. You hear these stories of saints that like really engaged in spiritual warfare, and had demons appear to them because they were holy enough. Or I'll never forget when I was little, I was really afraid of stigmata. Like I heard about Padre Pio, and I just kind of vowed to never get holy enough to receive it. So,
Sounds like something you would do, John.
And it's working.
yeah, I know. So
And it's working.
it's working. Yeah,
That's funny. That's good.
Great to be back with you all.
I know. Touche on that one, Ed. That was pretty good. That's pretty good.
So mysticism. All right. Here's where this all kind of comes together for Ronner. I think we could maybe agree on some level that the definition that we have in our heads of mysticism on some level is probably a listening to God, that God speaks in these extraordinary ways. You hear the stories of the saints who levitate, or they hear voices or see some vision or kind of get lifted into a state of ecstasy. And we call these people mystics, or people that hear a clear, articulated voice of God as if God's sitting in the room and saying, Joan of Arc, do this. We call these people mystics. And that would be kind of the narrowest, most proper definition of the word. Karl Rahner is not interested in that definition. He doesn't dismiss those sort of phenomena, those mystical phenomena. He doesn't say they're not real. He doesn't say, oh, they're just in people's heads. But he's starting from that place. Remember, he's a Jesuit. Jesuits seek to find God in all things. He's starting from the place, the ordinary experience of the average believer, whose experience of God is probably mostly silent. Someone who might pray, who might face God, but is confused because God doesn't seem to be speaking. So if we approach mysticism with this definition of a listening to God, I think we're always going to run into this wall of saying, well, I guess I'm not a mystic because I'm just a poor diocesan priest, or I'm just a lay peasant. Instead, Rahner's definition of mysticism can be thought of more as a listening for God, most especially in the everyday, and even including in the silence.
Okay, now let's make a distinction here. Not listening to God, listening for God. So
Yes.
there is a sense in which I show up to prayer, and if God wants to speak, I'm ready. I'm here. But if he chooses not to, I'm still ready and I'm still here. So the big difference is 2 versus 4.
Right. And it gets even more exciting because it's not just in moments of prayer, although that is certainly when we kind of flex those listening muscles. That's whenever we learn. It's that we listen for God in the everyday, in the ordinary, in each and every circumstance. If we are aware that we are a spirit, we are open to God at any given time, if we are aware of our freedom and we can turn to face God, if we are aware of our history, that we exist in space and time, and we have these beautiful senses that God can use to reveal God's self, then we can listen for God in each and every moment and develop this very deep awareness of what God may be speaking in this precise moment. That is Rahner's definition of mysticism.
All right, folks, did that make sense to you? Now, I want you to give us a yes or a no. You put a little caveats there on there. You have any questions over there, Ann? Any comments from people that you want to share with us? But anyway, give us a yes or a no on that one. I understood that, John. That made perfect sense. That made sense to me. Folks, that makes sense to you. What questions might you have for that very important definition of a mystic?
Okay. Linda says, I think the riffraff are more likely to experience God than the religious. And
sometimes.
I think, okay. Also, Arlene says, I thought that a mystic is one who becomes one with God.
What do you think of that, John?
Ooh, I like that. I think that absolutely fits in with what we're talking about, that this union with God, because we're humans, it's going to happen through our senses. It's going to happen in history. We're going to have this conscious awareness of God. Not in some, it's not like God is a UFO that sucks us up through a, what do they call, tractor beam, and we become one with God that way. It's that God comes to us and we can receive God in that way. I think if we go back to Ronner's quote now, the devout Christian of the future will either be a mystic, one who has experienced something, or he will cease to be anything at all. I think what he's talking about there is exactly what you're saying, that a mystic is someone who becomes one with God, who becomes aware of being one with God, who has an experience of this oneness with God precisely through listening for God in each and every moment.
So somewhere along the way, he has to be experiencing something, but oftentimes he's not experiencing anything as he's listening for God. Would that make sense?
Yeah, and this is where it gets really, really philosophical and phenomenological and all of that, that the mystic is the one who, even when experiencing nothing, is having an experience of experiencing nothing. That we're not just, yeah. There you go. Let's buckle up, guys. This Follow Your Faith episode is going to be 3.5 hours long, by the way. So the idea is that we're not let off the hook. We can't just sit around and wait for God to speak in this way. And if God doesn't speak, if God does not tell us exactly what to do, then, oh, I guess God doesn't love me. Or I guess I'm not holy enough to have this intimate union with God. I guess I'm not a mystic.
Let's forget all that stuff. Let's let that go.
Throw it out. Yeah. Because we are called to find God in all things. And the only possible way we can do that is if we let go of this idea of, I need to listen to God as God speaks. It's good. If it happens, it's great. Please share it with the rest of us because that edifies everyone. But more often than not, it's going to be a listening for God in the ordinary everyday.
Okay, now, John, just for a second, I know you have a bunch of stuff over there. She has a bunch of stuff over there. Just one real quickly. There are people who go to church to run away from life. There are people who go to church to find God. Those who are trying to run away from life, does this apply to them in any way as well? You know, we have a lot of different reasons why we go to church. We're looking for maybe the easy road of some sort. What kind of person is this postmodern Christian who's experienced something? I guess that's kind of I'm asking you. Does that make sense?
That's interesting. And I even see a comment that, mysticism sounds kind of new age. I think it does. I might flip it and say, the mystics got there first, and most of new age spirituality is, just kind of stealing that. Let's talk a little bit about what postmodernism looks like, because I'm sure every single person watching this can think of someone who fits that category of sort of spiritual but not religious. Is that kind of who you're talking about?
I'm talking about the person who, they could be religious, but they're seeking life. They're seeking truth, seeking meaning. And there are many people that go to church aren't seeking any of those things. You know?
So
maybe they've fallen off. I don't know. Maybe according to Ronner's definition, maybe they have ceased to be anything. But I still see them. I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm even being judgmental there by saying that. Go ahead.
I think it's a good question. Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Well, Karen has a question, and it's regarding the freedom part of it. Karen says Vatican II opened up the door of freedom for the laity. Before Vatican II, such freedom was only for the ordained or consecrated. Is that a true perspective?
I would say kind of going back to Father Mark, I've heard you say this many times, that Vatican II could be summed up with the word baptism.
Yes.
That I would say that, Vatican II opened the door for the idea that we are all called to this. This is not just for some holy people, whether ordained or not, and the rest of us are just sort of passive observers. We are all called to this on some level.
And prior to the council, if you were serious, you became a religious or you got ordained. People were stuck in that box. But now I see it everywhere. Laity who are on fire with a life of faith. I see that happening in people's lives. So I would think what Karen is asking is absolutely true. Yeah, I think she's right about that.
Yeah.
We could say it that way.
But let's go back to the person you describe it. This is the person that is just sort of going through the motions, the checklist. Is that kind of who you're talking about?
They might be devout in different ways, and they might be serious, actually, but they're serious in a way that, what's the difference between a prude and a promiscuous person? And I would say they're almost prudish in the sense of their faith, if I can put it that way. They're kind of almost closed off. I got the right path. This is what I'm doing. Off I go. And don't distract me from this. I'm serious in one sense of all this, but there's not this wonder. There's not this openness. There's not this listening for so much, because I already have it figured out, by the way.
Yeah, I think if you kind of look at all of these elements that Ronner's talking about, I think you see that in some ways that person might be rejecting some of them. There's not much of an openness. There's not much of a freedom even, and there's not much history. There's not much of an awareness that God's going to speak to us through our senses. I think we kind of end up being more churchy. But I think all of that, let me just sort of first affirm that when we're kind of talking about this, anyone that is going through the motions is doing something, is seeking something, is grasping for something, and that's good. That is very good. And I don't want anyone here to feel like I'm not 100% on board and encouraging of anyone who, even if they're just kind of going to mass with tunnel vision, that God's going to speak. God's a big boy. God will reach all of us. And I do believe that the sacraments, the liturgical life of the church, the scriptures, any sort of external latching on that we're using in our walk of faith, God can use it. God certainly will use it. I think what Ronner's kind of talking about in this essay, where this quote comes from, the devout Christian of the future will either be a mystic or cease to be anything at all. I think what he's saying is, while that might work for some people, and it's great that it works for some people, and there have been ages in the church where that has worked for a majority of people, we can't bank on that working for everybody in the future. As postmodernism kind of deinstitutionalizes things, decentralizes things, these sort of external actions are going to lose more and more and more of their meaning. We need to ground our faith in God in some sort of this experience.
Someone said recently that in the past we had institutional evangelization, and now what is required is personal evangelization. Given that deconstruction that you're talking about, would that make sense?
Yes. Say more about that before I kind of...
Well, he was talking about Christendom, I think. Most especially Christendom, the average person didn't have much meaning as far as their personal witness to the life of faith. The witness of the faith for Catholics and for Christians was the institution, the church, everything else. So now, with this deconstruction, the postmodern world we live in today, that institutional evangelization is lost. It's no longer there. The institutions are caving in all over the place. Now what's required is each of us, all of us, having this personal evangelism. We have to have a witness to our faith to the rest of the world, which would be this mystical experience, is what I'm thinking. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something you said is really important too, that across the board, there's a deinstitutionalization. It's not just religion that's being deinstitutionalized. I mean, someone compared it to political parties the other day. And, we don't need to wade into politics in any sense, but I think you're kind of seeing in any sort of domain in the 21st century, there's just a kind of distrust of institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to get transferred into our own personal experience on some level.
So let's go back. I didn't want to try. And I know there's a ton of things flying across here. You have anything else, Ann?
Well,
You want to?
There's a discussion.
They're going back and forth on they're
somebody's
together.
a little concerned about mysticism and the direction that can take you. And
Like it's a dangerous thing?
right. But I think if you would remind us, it's just, we were talking about the word wonder. I mean, God gave us a brain to think. And so in the search for God, you're going to search for answers and explore. And
What's scaring them?
because, if something's not literally in the Bible, like the word mysticism apparently is not in the Bible.
But in many
I think
ways
it
it
takes-
is.
yeah.
I mean, not the word, but in many
The word
ways.
Trinity isn't in the Bible either.
Yeah. There's a lot of words that aren't there.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
some people see things in a more black and white scenario rather than, looking beyond that.
Mm-hmm. John, can I ask you explain if modernism is a turn to the subject, postmodernism with Ron is a turn to the subject in relation.
Yeah. Let's talk about postmodernism, everybody.
Yeah, let's do that because that's where we live in right now. That's what we're living in. I mean, it's going to increase rather than decrease. I think I would say yes.
And I would very, very, very strongly argue that it should, and it's a good thing, and it can be a good thing. And maybe I'm just channeling Ronner, who kind of was saying the same thing about modernism 100 years ago. But I think to understand postmodernism, we need to understand modernism a little bit. Modernism would be sort of the grand conclusion of the Enlightenment in the 1700s, 1800s, the idea that with science, with rationality, we can come to objective truth. We could come to the answer. And that in this sort of empirical study of the world, we can grasp capital T truth, and we could answer every question that exists.
And there are many that still believe that. My nephew-in-law, we were over Thanksgiving, had a discussion, and we were talking about that, and we were talking about religion versus science, and he is completely convinced science will ultimately figure it out. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. It's what it is. And anything I talked about or mentioned to him, he said, science will get it. Eventually we'll get it. So it's kind of interesting. I haven't been anybody quite that in with science before, quite the way he is. But that's his view. That's his
right.
view.
Well, that would kind of be very, very modernist. And when I use the phrase "it turned to the subject," modernism is all about the subject, the knower, that I can come to truth. That if I learn enough, I can grasp truth myself. Postmodernism begins to deconstruct that. The like most extreme form of postmodernism would be relativism, which would say, well, there is no truth, that we couldn't possibly get there, so there's no such thing as truth.
Or I'm the source of it.
That's like the farthest extreme of postmodernism. And in many ways, this is a tangent. I think that's just taking this quest for objective truth and dressing it up in a postmodern lens. I think true postmodernism is the realization that if we are going to come to truth, it's going to come from many different angles. There's going to be a plurality, and it's going to be kind of like we're never going to get to the center of the diamond, but we can get to the edge of it, and we could see the 1,000 facets, and we could see all these different ways that light pierces this diamond, and we can all agree that there is a diamond. It's not that there's no diamond, but that I can't possibly see the diamond the way you can. So to try to seek this definition of, well, here's how to look at a diamond is kind of a ridiculous task. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Let me go back. Let me ask this. Given this dialogue that's going on over here on YouTube here, how does the mystic then, given all that, what you just said, live in the life of the church?
Yes. The way the mystic lives in the church is to realize that we are in this intimate relationship with God. And this goes back to what you were talking about with personal evangelization, a personal relationship with God. That my relationship with God is going to look different than your relationship with God, than Anne's relationship with God, with anyone who's commenting here, with their relationship with God.
Same God, same God.
Same God. So it's not that we are trying to distill out the exact nature of what this relationship is or what this relationship is not, even though there might be certain guidelines, there might be certain signposts that we could use to sort of define this relationship a little bit more. But it's that instead of focusing on the subject and the subject search for certain concrete truth, it's that we've come to appreciate this subject in relation. Relationship is very important in postmodernism. Fluidity, decentralized relationship between God, between us, between each of us. It's a much more living, breathing, dynamic reality. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, what does that mean in the life? What does that mean in the life of many people who say, well, you mean there's no absolute truths?
I would say first, there are absolute truths. We would believe that truth is a person. Truth,
yes,
capital
Yes,
T,
you would. Yeah.
Truth is a person. The way that we try to distill the person of Jesus Christ into words, that gets a lot more complicated. But please don't think that this is a decentralization and saying, well, in postmodernism, Jesus is just whatever you want to make him to be. Yeah, right. Jesus Christ is a real person that we
now we're talking New Age. Now we're talking New Age if we're going in that direction. Yeah,
that would be New Age, because that places the focus on you yourself. No. The focus is still on an other, but someone
which you
who
are in
always
relationship with. Yeah, which you're in relationship with all the other. Now,
so when we think about the church here, and when I think about the mission of the church, I think that the mission of the church is to awaken this sense of relationship with God. I think without an experience of a relationship with God, without at least a fundamental awareness that we are open to God's self-communication in this moment, I don't know what the future of the church could possibly look like. But with an awareness of God, with this experience, this sort of mystical understanding of our fundamental openness and our relationship with God, then I think I do know what the church can look like. I'd see it at our Mother of Sorrows. I mean, Holly and I still talk about it. That's why this is Billy. I told Father Mark that this picture was hanging or hidden away in our basement. No, it really is hanging up here, because I think when you get a community of people who have had this common experience, when they band together and can say, I think I've met him too. I think I know who you're talking about when you talk about this Jesus Christ. I think they begin to shine a light together, and that light gets so bright that that community, that church, that assembly becomes an actual sign and sacrament of the world's salvation. It becomes a fire so bright that people can't help but see it and be attracted to it, and a fire so hot that when people encounter it, they can't help but be transformed by it. I think that's the role of the mystic, the one who has experienced something in the church.
Beautiful. And let's talk about maybe the greatest mystic of them all, who is Mary herself. How would you see, how does this connect with Mary and her great yes? May it be done to me as you say.
Yeah, I think we could play with all these terms and see them in Mary. Was Mary aware of an openness she had to God? I think, yeah. I think when an angel tells you, hey, you're going to bear God's son, you like it or not, you're going to be pretty abruptly aware of that openness. Was Mary aware that God would come to her in history, in space and time? I think so. I've never birthed a child, but I imagine you become a little bit aware of the historical moment that you are living in. But then I think I think that goes back to that second element of Mary's freedom. It's kind of a fun theological thought problem of, could Mary have said no? Could she have looked the angel Gabriel in the eyes and said, no, not for me. Go on to someone else. And, of course, the answer is very complicated well, technically she could have said no, but the grace that prepared her to say yes would have prevented her from saying yes in the first place. But we would believe that Mary was free, that she made a free yes. That's what we just celebrated in the Immaculate Conception, that sin did not tarnish her ability to say yes. I would believe that through the rest of her life, Mary lived in a constant state state of listening for God in each and every moment, that she was intimately guided by him.
Now, we're running out of time real quick. I just want to mention one thing. Rollheiser in Holy Longings talks about this quote from Ron, and he talks about three things. First of all, he says the mystic is someone who is a personal act of faith, person who prayers. And the third part, he says, is someone who ponders, which you're describing, carrying the tension. And he writes this: thus, to ponder biblically is to stand before life's great mysteries the way Mary stood before the various events of Jesus' life, including the way she stood under the cross. There is great joy in that, but there can also be incredible tension. The type of mysticism that we most need today to revitalize our faith is precisely this kind of pondering, a willingness to carry tension as Mary did. I think you described that pretty well, John, with all that. I think you did a job describing that, what she did. She pondered it all. It was very, what does this greeting mean? What is this? What's going on here? What's all this about? And I think we get the idea sometime that Mary just got it and she knew exactly, and she's, got all this, everything's fine. I'm just going to move on with life. But she pondered what the meaning of it all was. And what was it? It said she reflected on these things and carried them in her heart, or something like Luke chapter 2, verse 51. I don't remember exactly the words there with that. But yeah, I think that's beautiful what you said about her.
Yeah, she led with yes. I think that's always been kind of what attracts me, what fascinates me, what gravitates me toward Mary, that it's not just that she was aware that she held these things in tension and pondered. She started with yes, and that allowed her to, I think, engage her reality more deeply.
Absolutely. John, thank you. Any final words you want to help clarify, anything you want to share with us on this really fascinating topic? Thanks, folks, for watching us. Many of you who watched us here tonight. Very, very grateful and John, thank you for your words. I think it's beautiful what you're saying here today. Anything else you'd like to share, kind of to bring us to a close?
I think I would just kind of conclude by saying we are all called to be mystics. Every single person here is called to be a mystic, to be aware of your relationship with God. It matters. It matters. I think if we can live out of that awareness of what God is doing in our lives, I think the rest of everything will fall into place. So I know you're already doing it at Omos, but thank you.
We're really trying to do it here. I'm really trying, but we asked the question earlier on, do you guys believe that it is possible for us to be mystics? And pretty much everybody said yes, that was pondering all that. So I'm kind of grateful for that. And I hope many of you who are watching us now actually believe or feel that you are mystics, that you are listening for God to speak to you. And when you go to prayer, silence or not, it's like, I'm waiting, I'm here, I'm being present. Whenever I go to prayer, I wouldn't share this too much, but it's all I really want to do. I don't know about you, John, or you, Ann. All I really want to do is be present. That's all I want to do. I just want to be as present as I possibly can be. Somehow, all the different things I worry about all day long, to kind of let them go and just be radically present for God for whenever he chooses to speak.
I love it. That's perfect.
Thanks, John, very much. Folks, next week, We're going to talk a little bit about the Christmas story, not whether you got your Christmas tree up or whether you got all your presents bought or your Christmas cards done. And you have it all done, Ann?
Are you kidding?
Steve, you all done with your Christmas? Anyway, we're going to talk about the Christmas story a little bit and what that all is. And the second thing we're going to talk about next week, we're going to have a little topic about worry. And we worry about a lot of stuff. And here's this woman, Mary, that we're talking about, this great adventure of her and Joseph going down there to Bethlehem and eventually ending up in Egypt and everything else. I don't think they worried, in a sense. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week. That'll be our last time we're going to get together until Christmas, because it gets fast and furious at that point. And so thanks, John, very much.
Thank you.
Tell
Thank
Holly
you.
we said hello. Is she watching us any chance, or is she...
I think she's in the basement watching.
Okay, I think she might be
with
watching.
the dog.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why.
And thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. And I tried my best.
You did good. Anything, and Steve who's like our anchor here. Without Steve, we're not doing anything here at all.
No.
So thank you, everybody, for watching us. Thanks, John. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Steve. And we'll see all of you next week as we begin to talk more and more about that great moment of Christmas. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.